the counter has stopped going up, so we get going. Evening, everyone. I'm Faye Appleton. I'm the Director of Membership and Education at Lincoln's Inn. Before we get started, I'm just going to briefly run through the arrangements for this evening's session. So our talks from our panelists will last for about an hour, and then it'll be followed by Q&A, and we should be finishing at around 7:30. Please, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A function rather than in the chat so that we can see them clearly. Please can I ask that you only ask questions about the topic of this evening's talks. If you have any more general questions about the inn or qualifying sessions or anything like that, Emma and I will be staying on for 10 minutes or so at the end to answer any of those more general questions. If you're having any problems with your connection or issues with sound for any of our speakers, then please do let us know in the chat function. If you do drop out due to internet or other connection issues, please sign back in using the same details as soon as possible. Once the Q&A has finished, you are free to leave. We will record your attendance using Zoom's built-in reporting functionality, which lists all of you out and when you joined and left the session. However, please do bear in mind that the accreditation of the qualifying session onto your record isn't an automated process. It's quite a manual process where we have to cross-check the report from Zoom against our registers. And so it can take a week or so for this to appear on your record on the web portal. So please do bear with us while we get that sorted. Right, that's enough from me. So our topic this evening is resilience and wellbeing at the bar, and our speakers are James Pereira, QC, Emma Southern, Marissa Cohen, and Robin White. Robin is running slightly late and will hopefully be joining us soon. I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who is James.
Great. Well, I was going to say good evening, but I'm not quite sure where everyone is in the world. Maybe if you're not in the UK, just put a message in the chat to let us know where you're from. My father's family are from India, and right now I'd much prefer to be there than standing in my front room in North London. But fantastic. Someone in Australia around the other side of the world.
Gosh, you've got up very early in Australia. And everyone else looks like it's late to bed. Yeah,
wonderful. Well, thank you for being here. One of the upsides of the pandemic is that we can be all around the world and speaking to each other, which is a lovely thing. I've got some invitations for you before we start. The first invitation is just to settle in, really. We spend a lot of time at the bar, and as a student and as a practitioner, kind of rushing around and fitting things in between being somewhere else, and in many ways never really being present with where we are. So I just really invite you to get yourself comfortable in your chair and take a couple of deep breaths, which is what I'm going to do right now, because my heart's pumping quite hard at the anticipation of giving this talk. And just bring yourself into presence. And this is a talk about resilience and well-being. You're going to hear from a number of speakers that have all got some really interesting and inspiring stories to tell. And I guess there's a part of you that wouldn't be here now unless you had something on your mind that was relevant to resilience and well-being. So my other invitation to you is just to kind of ask yourself what it is that comes up for you, what it is you might think in your own world or your own interaction with your work that might need some focus. Maybe it's a recurring story you tell yourself when you start a piece of work, or if you're practicing or you're studying for the bar, it might be something like, I don't work fast enough. I've got that one. That always happens to me. I'm not fast enough at my work. Or I get too nervous. Or I find planning cross-examination quite demanding. Or I'm not fluent enough as an advocate. Whatever it is, just hold it lightly, because you're going to hear stories from people this evening who are practitioners who have faced challenges and they've overcome them. And they might reflect back to you some wisdom that you already have that maybe you're not aware of yet. So just hold that thing lightly for yourself. Let me say a little bit about myself, and then I'll start with my talk. I do two things or three things actually. I'm a barrister, so I'm a practicing barrister at a chamber school, Francis Taylor Building. I'm a Silk, and I do planning and environmental law. Took Silk in 2014. I'm also a visiting professor of law at King's, so I teach environmental law there. And then about a third to half my time is spent coaching, actually, coaching and training. So I'm a certified coach, and I do organizational, team and individual coaching. I'm trained in hypnosis and NLP. And I work systemically, which means I look, when I'm dealing with clients or organizations, I look at things not only from the personal perspective, but also the systems of belonging that people have. So their family, their history, their biography, their culture, the organizations they belong to, their loyalties, things like that, because loyalties and belonging are really important to our well-being. So that's a little bit about me, and that kind of half explains why I'm here. My talk's in three parts. The first part is the problem. The problem. What's the problem? Well, let me tell you a little bit of a personal story for me. So I was called in 1996, and I was really successful for many years. I was kind of, there's a thing, Chambers and Partners Barrister of the Year. I was nominated for that as a junior while I was still less than 10 years called, and I won it twice as a junior. I used to get ranked in all the rankings, kind of at the top. I had a very, very large house in North London with a very large drive and a very large garden and an indoor heated swimming pool and a sports car and a 4x4 on the drive. I went on very long, expensive holidays, etc., etc., etc. So externally, everything looked absolutely fantastic. One might say people might have looked at me and envied what was happening. But internally, I was kind of a bit like, I don't know if you've ever seen a kind of swan paddling on the lake. It looks very majestic on the outside. If you look at its feet going underneath, paddling frantically like that. And that was me. The hamster on the wheel, I suppose, is the other thing. And I was working all kinds of hours, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. My weekends were either for recovery or they were for catching up. All of my social engagements would get cancelled. My kids would come into the study when they were little, and they pick up my highlighter pens and start coloring in my papers, because that was the way they get to spend time with me. My relationship started to break down. The year I took Silk was also the year my marriage failed. I left home. And then I was kind of faced with being kind of at the top of things and at the bottom of things all at the same time. And then in November of 2014, I was on a train with a junior going to a case, and I just collapsed. I wasn't expecting it. I collapsed. My head hit the table in front of me. I came round, and there were various concerned looking passengers and the hostesses there trying to revive me. I collapsed a second time then. And my junior looked at me absolutely petrified, and I don't know whether it's because he was concerned about doing the case himself or whether it was because he was worried about my well-being. And I looked at him and I said, Jack Connor, his name is, Jack, what time are we starting tomorrow? And he said, 9:30. And I said, well, just send an email to the clients and tell them we're going to start at 10 because I need to have a bit of a lie-in. And he looked at me and he said, and bless him, because he'd only just been called to the bar, so he wasn't kind of ingrained with all of the bad habits that I'd acquired over the years. And he said, what are you doing? You've just collapsed. There was a doctor in the cabin who told me to go to A&E. And he said, what are you doing? He said, don't be stupid. You've got to take some time off. And I actually listened for once, and I took his permission to be vulnerable. And it's a lesson for everyone on the call, no matter how senior or junior you are. You can be a leader in this area, because senior people sometimes feel reluctant to show their vulnerability, but you can take the lead in that. And I took a week off, and I thought to myself, you know what, I've been here before, and this feels a bit close to the line. So I'm going to do something about it. And I did. I started to go and see a coach and get some kind of really a framework to figure out what was going on for me. And somebody I knew at the time said to me, you know what, you can complain about all this stuff about the bar, but what you got to ask yourself is, why are you doing it? Why are you working all of these hours? Why are you choosing to spend your weekends working? Why are you choosing to decide you need to earn this much money? And it was quite a brutal reality check for me about self-responsibility. And that's another lesson I would say to you. You've got to take responsibility for yourself. And then just when I thought things couldn't get any lower, in 2015, I realized I couldn't actually work anymore. And I was diagnosed with something called Adjustive Depressive disorder, which is a form of depression caused by the breakup of my marriage, because I was just devastated with leaving the family and my children, and I couldn't work. And for 2 or 3 months, I'd never had anything like it since. It was like being weighed down with a huge, great rock and trying to walk through treacle and just wanting to lie in bed. And I got through that. And I'm saying that rather quickly because it wasn't that easy. I'll tell you what happened, actually. I got to rock bottom and I thought, you know what? I just can't be bothered to do this anymore. And I thought that for quite a while. And all of that success and everything didn't really mean very much at that point in time. And then there's a part of me that said, actually, you work bloody hard and you're not bad at what you do. So why don't you figure out a different way of doing it and maybe give that a go first? And so, having kind of given up on everything, I then started this process of fighting back. And that led me to do what I do now. In other words, to divide my time up between supporting other people and still doing my job. And I do my job in ways that are so different to how I have seen it being done or how I used to do it. And so I want to then move on to part 2 of the talk, which is what I might call beginning again. So I've said about taking responsibility for oneself, and whether you're a student or you're a pupil or wherever you are in your barristerial journey, there is no point waiting for other people to do things for you, because it's very unlikely you will get anywhere that way. Of course, we all need support. We need to surround ourselves by people who have got our backs and are going to support us, but ultimately we've got to take responsibility for ourselves. So I started off just unlearning things, and this is my invitation to you. You'll have a lot of well-meaning bad teachers, and I mean that with the greatest affection for everyone in the profession. So you'll be taught things like, your client's case rests on your shoulders. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. There's a whole load of stuff that is absolutely beyond your control, like what are the facts, or how are my witnesses going to perform, or what does the law say, or what's the mood of the judge this morning. You can't do anything about that, but if you listen to people telling you the weight of the world is on your shoulders, you're going to be in difficulty. So understand your role and unlearn some of the things that are, look at the things you're being told and decide if they're helpful to you. Don't have an arrogant belief in your responsibility. We're just people who do a job, really, at the bar. Another thing I kind of let go of are what I call more work mantras. There are loads of more work mantras at the bar. They sound something like this. You've got to burn the midnight oil. That's an absolute classic. I love that one. That's been hitting the charts for I don't know how many years. You've got to burn the midnight oil. You can't turn away work. Mustn't turn away work. If you turn away work, someone else is going to take the work off you. And then you're going to fail. Your practice is going to dissolve. That's another nonsense one as well. Oh, here's one of my favorite ones. To be a barrister, you've got to be able to get on top of things at the last minute. I love that one. That one is an absolute recipe for breakdown if you really embrace it. Of course, sometimes we get things at the last minute, and of course, sometimes we have to get on top of things. But to live your life with the expectation that you can handle everything thrown at you in the last minute is a recipe for disaster. It's not serving you at all. It ingrains really unhealthy habits about encouraging solicitors and allowing solicitors to give you things at the last minute, and allowing the team to give you things at the last minute because, hey, you're the barrister and you can deal with last minute things. And it just puts unnecessary pressure on you. And by the way, it's probably not the best way to serve your client, doing things at the last minute, fundamentally. Perfectionism, that's another thing you've got to ditch. Everyone makes mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. Some of them matter, some of them don't. Important thing is that you learn from them, and maybe learn from other people's mistakes too, but really learn from them. I have a running list in a draft email. I'm on about point 76, 77 now, of things that when you come out of court, you come out of an advocacy exercise or whatever, and you start thinking, oh, why didn't I say that? Why didn't I ask that question? Why didn't I do that? No. Just write it down. I keep a list going. I keep a list going, and rather than saying don't do, it tells me what it is I should do. Rather than saying don't be anxious, it says, you know, be confident. Or rather than saying, don't shy away from a fight, it says, you know, stand up to the judge if it's appropriate, things like that. Think of positive things to put, and it helps you offload it from your mind as well. And here's another one, which is going to bring me into part 3, which is logic and reason. We are told and we are trained that really, you know, to be a lawyer, logic and reason is your, you know, your sword. It's the thing that gets you there. Of course, it does to a large extent. But what happens when you over prioritize your brain and your mind to the exclusion of other things is that about 9/10 of your body gets left behind, and about 9/10 of your capacity gets left behind. And let me tell you what I mean by that. By going on to what I might call part 3, which I've called the road to change. I've got about 3 minutes left, so I'll deal with this quickly. What's the road to change? If you look in the latest Counsel magazine, I think it's either this month or last month, you'll see an article that me and my work, and actually as it happens life partner, Zita Tulihikayo wrote. She's a hypnotherapist and coach as well, about new skills training for the bar. And the basic premise is this, the basic hypothesis is this. I'd ask you just to listen. For loads of really good reasons, and it's absolutely essential. When a bar education and law education is very knowledge-based, it's very technical knowledge-based, and the skills-based training is focused on what the output's got to look like. You know, what do good questions in cross-examination look like? What does an opinion when it's written look like? What does a pleading when it's written look like? What we're not taught, and what took me 25 years to figure out, is how do I take care of my back of house? When I wake up in the morning and I've got to get to court and I've got to stand up in front of a judge and I'm not feeling great, or I think the case is a bit too difficult for me, or I've got a really difficult witness to cross-examine, how do I get into the state to do that? I can have the most perfect notes, but if I walk into court and the judge is a man of a certain age who reminds me of my father, who I had conflict issues with, or the woman is of a certain kind who reminds me of my sister or my mother who I have difficulty with, or whatever it might be, because we all carry things from our personal biography. How do I deal with that? Because you can have the best notes in the world, and if there's something going on inside you that isn't supporting you, it's going to undermine you. And if your opponent's smart, he might even spot it and press your buttons for you, and then you're off in some other place, even though you're physically in court. So one thing, and this is my kind of aim and ambition, and what I'd invite everyone to try and embrace on their well-being journey, is a number of things. One, work on your personal awareness and your personal stuff. You know, all of us know if we're feeling anxious about something going wrong in the trial we're doing in 3 weeks' time, that's something to do not directly with what's going to happen in 3 weeks' time, because we don't actually know. That's to do with a story we're running in our heads about how adequate we are for whatever reason. And we can deal with that. We can handle that. There are things that people can do to resource themselves on that. So work on your personal awareness. 2, communication skills. Barristers aren't taught communication skills. Isn't that funny? You know, if I go to Middle Temple and say, what's your communication skills program? You're not taught it. What does the practice statement say? It says we've got to be able to, we've got to know about verbal and non-verbal communication. We've got to be, we've got to know how to communicate with people from different backgrounds. We've got to be able to demonstrate empathy. None of us are taught any of that. Communication skills training, another thing. Team working. The practice statement says we should know how to work in teams. None of us are taught how to work in teams. We can all benefit from that. And my 4th one for working on is problem solving. We're all paid lots of money to solve problems. We're not taught how to solve problems apart from applying law to legal problems. There's a whole load of creative things that we can do to do this. Finally, because I know I'm out of time, what's this got to do with well-being? What's this got to do with well-being? Well, look, the basic thing is this. If we feel resourced to do our job, we feel good about it, and we feel competent, and we feel more or less on top of it. Where do we get our resources from? We get our resources from our state, what state we're in, and from the training and the skills that we've had. Some of them we need to practice, of course. Some of them are personal, some of them are more technical. We need to get a more holistic basis to that. And then we can really walk into court and do our job resourced and stay well. So that's a bit about my journey. That's a bit about what I have learned and what I do. I'm going to just put in a little plug, if I might. One is, please connect with me on LinkedIn. I love connecting people, especially students. The second thing is, we've been writing a regular column in The Lawyer Online called Loving Legal Life. We've been doing it for about 5 years. There are about 60 or 70 articles so far on professional performance and well-being. It's all free on The Lawyer Online, Loving Legal Life. Third thing is, I coach with me and my partner through something called the Libra Partnership. You can check out our website. Please keep in touch with us. And the fourth thing is, we just started doing some skills training workshops with Middle Temple. I know that the Lincoln's Inn people are online. Please, we'll for free come and do you a little thing for free, because we're really passionate about this. But we will be offering skills training workshops, new stuff for barristers. I really want everyone to be successful and be empowered and have a whole range of skills they can call upon, because it's a really good fun job if we can get it right that way. That's my message. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for sharing and for all that advice. And yeah, you've given me lots of ideas for future qualifying sessions, and we're very keen as well to look at more professional development for our barrister members. So I shall certainly be in touch. Right, I'm going to ask our next speaker to talk to you now, Emma Southern.
Thank you, Faye. Good evening, everybody. My name's Emma Southern. I am a family practitioner. I was called in 2006 and practice from 3 paper buildings. Most of my practice takes place on the Western Circuit, so outside of London. And I'm a member of the Bar Rep Committee at Lincoln's Inn, so trying to ensure that we have lots of practitioners on circuit accessing and using the inn, as you guys all are now across the globe. Can I first of all start by saying I feel absolutely and truly inspired by James's speech. It is so refreshing to hear someone senior speaking so candidly about the pressures that we face, and the fact that sometimes we all just need to take stock of where we're at and take a deep breath and reflect on who we are, and the fact that we need some form of resilience to continue on in our journey and progress. So thank you for that. And I think it's a good time for us all to hear it right now, what with lockdown and us feeling like it's a never-ending journey. However, my speech this evening to you all is the bar a perspective from a parent of young children. And becoming a parent for me was both an elating but terrifying experience. Almost comparable, I suppose, to the first occasion I appeared on my feet in the Crown Court during pupillage. As a parent-to-be, your head is spinning and swirling with what if and how to, as well as trying to maintain a practice at the bar before the arrival day. And the reality is, it is really difficult to prepare for every eventuality in life. And there can be all sorts of complications in terms of arrival, labour, adoption arrangements, all the rest of it. And the grave uncertainty adds to our angst and our distraction whilst trying to maintain a practice. The purpose of this talk is to information share about what to expect in terms of how chambers should be accommodating you as a parent, whether you are newly receiving a child into your family or later on down the line. We are all individuals, as has been identified, and will inevitably have very different views about whether to take parental leave. I would encourage you to do so. If you do choose to, how long for? There's no magic number, but it's something that I'd encourage you to speak widely about, not solely to colleagues in chambers, but to those people who make you who you are, your support network. So the other parent of your child, your wider family, your friends, and people who have got your back, because as has been identified at the bar, there is an attitude whereby you must work for the next brief. You don't decline the work. You want to be off for as limited a time as possible so your practice doesn't go down the drain. But the reality of the situation is people can't help scaremongering. Most of us who are already parents cannot resist giving advice to parents to be, whether it is helpful or not. And it's important that you gather the views of those people that you respect and trust before ultimately making your own decision. But in order to do that, I would advise you to consult your Chamber's parental leave policy once you have that opportunity. And you will be clear as to where you stand and your obligations and entitlements. Thankfully now, those are included within the BSB handbook, and chambers are required to have a written parental policy, which includes various procedures and requirements to ensure that those of us who need to take parental leave can do so, and that there are programs in place to enable rent provisions to be adapted, and there is a minimum that is allowed in terms of being away from chambers, such that your total leave taken a maximum, so that your total leave does not exceed a minimum of a year. So there is the provision in the written context to encourage us to take the leave. But unfortunately, there still seems to be, certainly in some practice areas, a context that it's not seen to be the done thing. Just pausing there, I took different periods of maternity leave. I should have said I have two children, two boys. One is 7 and the other is now 5, and they're both at school. So I've sort of got in the swing of it now, I suppose is the best way to say, but it's taken a long time. And when you're considering maternity leave, lots of people, if you're employed, look at about taking 9 months to a year off. I have some friends who took 6 weeks, 8 weeks and were back at work. I have some friends who describe being on eternity leave and still have not returned, and their children are at school and they're considering returning at some point. There is no right answer. It's about reflecting on what is best for you and what will work for your family. I think it's probably fair, though, to say that those at the self-employed bar might have a tougher decision with the inevitable worries about retaining a practice, and perhaps more so about income, particularly if you are at the publicly funded bar, which I am. I can't promise you that taking leave will have no impact on your practice or your income. Inevitably it will. But if you have made it as far as the bar and securing a practice, you clearly have demonstrated your ability to carve a practice. People will want to instruct you when you return. And it's really about confidence building and not forgetting that you are perfectly capable, notwithstanding the fact that you have been away from work for a number of months. In terms of confidence building, that's certainly something that I experienced on return to work, that imposter syndrome that I certainly felt as a student, as a pupil. I still do now find it very difficult to tell people that I'm a barrister. I have no idea why, because it's been 14 years or something, but it's still difficult for it to flow off of my tongue. And it's something I should be proud of, but I still face that confidence crisis sometimes. And it's really thinking about how to build yourself that resilience and to return. Something I found helpful was retaining my practicing certificate during leave. You have a choice when you go on parental leave, whether to retain your practicing certificate or to pause or suspend it. Keeping mine helped in the way me retain my identity, I suppose, as a barrister. I kept my finger in terms of my CPD requirement, my learning opportunities, my second maternity leave, I completed my pupil supervisor training. So it wasn't a downtime necessarily, and I really enjoyed that stimulus away from looking after a little baby as a change. So when you're on maternity leave or paternity leave, you can look at doing CPD days and opportunities. You can access keeping in touch days, which are identified days where you can do billable work if you've kept your practicing certificate going. If you choose to pause or cancel your practicing certificate for a period of leave, you cannot do any billable work or hold yourself out to be a practicing barrister during that time. So that's something to factor in. When you return to work, you will need to decide about the arrangements that you want to make, whether you want to work part-time or full-time. Again, if you're junior or have imposter syndrome as I did and do, it is vital that you take the lead in arranging a meeting with your clerk, setting out the boundaries and framework in terms of expectations. Prior to having a family, I would have travelled and did travel nationwide at the drop of a hat, and didn't really think twice about it because I was determined to carve my practice. Now, I do not encourage that now with hindsight and the benefit of hindsight. It wasn't necessary, but I simply couldn't do that anymore with children. The childcare ended at a set time. I had to be back by then. And so making that really clear with the clerks benefited me because we were all working from the same hymn sheet, as the saying goes. It's important to set a start date of returning well in advance so that the clerks can start to publicise your anticipated return using social media, LinkedIn profile. Don't simply leave it to your clerks. And then when you're looking at childcare, try and find someone or somewhere where you feel completely comfortable. It is a daunting experience leaving your children with other people, particularly when you're leaving them in a location and you're 100 miles away for the day in another location in court. But it improves with time. We all grow in confidence as that happens. And I have found that having a sort of backup option, a family friend or family member that can be there if you're stuck on a train or the worst happens, if you have that backup, often you don't need to use it, but it's really reassuring to have it there. So importance about childcare, and then that enables you to relax a little bit and really find that confidence in returning to work and doing what you love best in terms of your practice. One thing I make a plea of, I suppose, at the end of this speech is in terms of retaining parents at the bar. I have listened to a number of the lectures on the Western Circuit Women's Forum who have done a study in this regard. It's particularly prevalent amongst women, but also applies to men, that at a certain level of seniority or call, when people tend to have a family, there is a stark drop-off in the terms of parents returning to the bar. And we as a profession, in my opinion, need to do more to retain parents. It is a difficult profession to juggle, and we are all in the mindset so often, as James referred to earlier, of perfectionism, wanting to have it all, giving everything 100%. And actually, if having children has taught me anything, it's made me realise that not everything goes to plan. Some things, there aren't answers in the books. When you ask someone to do X, they won't always do X. Quite often they'll do Y, and never do X. And actually that's okay, because we all do things differently, and that's what life is about. It's one of the real wonders. And so I suppose the best thing to reflect on is the fact that we can't all be 100% all the time at everything that we do. but a little bit of time for yourself and doing something that you love, enabling you to ground yourself again and reset, makes you, well, certainly makes me a better mother, a better wife, and a better barrister ultimately. So I would encourage you, as James had, to make sure that you take that time to reflect, so that you can build the resilience to progress. And I wish you all well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. There's loads of absolutely brilliant advice there for parents, prospective parents, or even those who are considering taking a career break for another reason and want to come back to the bar afterwards. So thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to our third speaker, Marissa Cohen.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marissa Cohen. It's very sad. I'm a barrister at Doughty Street Chambers. I practice in public law with an emphasis on immigration and community care. I'll be talking about my experience of disability and the bar. I'm profoundly deaf and I wear 2 cochlear implants now, although I spent the majority of my life with 2 hearing aids. I mainly lip read, which means I read people's faces and their lips to see what they're saying, and I use them listening as well. In terms of my route to the bar, so I'll talk about that first of all. I'll talk about my experience as a pupillage, and then finally life at the bar itself. So my route to the bar was fairly typical, although I didn't really know what a barrister was until I was in my first year of a qualifying law degree, law with politics. I was very attracted to the fact that you can be self-employed at the bar. That was a very big pull for me, not to the idea of not having someone tell you what to do. I did a master's in human rights law after my BA, and then completed what was then the bar vocational course. Lots of people, I think, well, did make it quite clear that they didn't think it would be possible for me to qualify as a barrister. Some people suggested, perhaps with good intentions, that they thought I should be a solicitor instead, saying that they thought that I would find that easier. But of course, as a deaf person, being able to work independently, i.e. mainly on my own, with limited teamwork, is actually a real bonus. I used mini pupillages when I was studying, including Jane Farrar, who you've just heard from, to work out what kind of support would suit me best. So I tried lip speakers, who are people who literally mouth what is being said, before discovering stenographers, who produced a live written transcript of what is being said in real time, a bit similar to subtitles on the television. And in fact, I'm following that now when other people speak during this meeting. And I get funding from Access to Work for those stenographers. And that's quite a bit sort of important point if you do need support for a disability at the bar, because Access to Work do provide 100% of the funding costs for those who are self-employed. So of course that makes it possible. In terms of pupillage, I had a good experience. I found pupillage supervisors generally very supportive. One queried whether they thought I could really do this. They seemed satisfied after my pretend excessive confidence in response. To be clear, I'm not suggesting anyone should lie, of course, but the reality is that I had no idea really if I could really do this until I was doing it. And so the question itself, although very well intentioned, was probably a bit misguided. Chambers were also extremely supportive, and of course there are certain chambers who are very encouraging, particularly of minority groups at the bar. And so even if they don't always sort of say the right things, they do try to do the right thing. Of course, pupillage is such a difficult time because you're in a very vulnerable position, and you don't always want to have to speak out or be seen to be speaking out against something. But there are times where you can use that, I think, to demonstrate your skills in an appropriate way. It will be a way in which you can obviously speak with people, other people you may not otherwise come across in chambers. In terms of the building of practice, I think as James and Emma have said, it is really, really important to be quite clear about your boundaries, because you are ultimately self-employed. And the attraction or the temptation is to really just accept whatever work is thrown at you. But of course, in terms of my disability, I think I had to sort of really think quite hard about what I thought would and wouldn't work. So, for example, when I was shadowing a barrister in the magistrates court, who was literally running from court to court to court within the space of a couple of hours, I knew that that probably would not work for me, because I had a sonographer with me in person who was also having to lug their equipment around. And so Chambers adjusted their sort of typical pupillage practice to enable me to not do crime during my pupillage. I also made clear to clerks and to solicitors as well that I could not use the telephone, although I do a lot of video calls now. And so I had good experiences generally in terms of broadening my practice, particularly as I started working more in the same courts, in tribunals. And so of course you come across the same clerks and the same judges. In terms of a typical work week, I do mainly paperwork, judicial reviews, presently sitting at my makeshift desk in my bedroom at home until my children come home from school, and then carrying on with work in the evening. I used to do some urgent work, but probably less so now. And I also sit as a part-time judge and sit on remote hearings at the moment from home. So in terms of what I would suggest, the sort of issues that we need to think about if you do have a disability at the bar, I would say be confident about what you can do. And equally, don't be afraid to say what support you do need. You and you alone are going to be the best judge of your abilities. Don't let anyone else try and tell you what is best for you. And even now, I forget that people who are not in my position don't always appreciate what is it like. For example, in remote hearings, for instance, when you can't always follow what is being said. And it's also worth exploring support avenues, particularly at the in support. I always found them incredibly helpful when I was a student and as a pupil in terms of navigating various issues, where to find out what information. And of course, they have funding available for certain areas. The Inner Temple had a disability fund, which I used to help me with getting equipment during my first steps in my pupillage. Building relationships with colleagues and joining groups and chambers is also a really good way of developing a support network at the bar. And in Doughty Street, we've recently set up a disability working group in chambers, which is proving to already be very useful in terms of learning from shared experiences and working out how to improve access to the bar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marissa, for sharing your experiences. And I can't imagine how often you get the sort of, as you say, the sort of entirely inappropriate, but not entirely not well-meaning, as it were. But I very much applaud your perseverance. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask our final speaker to talk to you now, Robin White.
Oh, good evening, all. Thank you very much for inviting me along. I'd like to take you back 10 years to 2011. And I was listening to James's story, and I had a certain resonance from James. And there I was in 2011 as a pretty successful junior, upper end of junior employment and discrimination practitioner. But I was dying inside because I'm trans, and I've been trans since I've known I'm trans since I was 7 or 8. I could put a word on it. I could put a label on it from when I was 12 or 13. I'm that old that there were only 3 TV channels back in those days, and I remember watching a program on BBC 2 because I lived in deepest rural Somerset before the internet existed. Yes, there was a time before the internet. I know people doubt that these days, but listen to what Abraham Lincoln tells you. Don't believe, as Abraham Lincoln says, don't believe everything that you read on the internet. Anyway, I had horrendous experience in my first choice of career, and I had found myself discriminated against, and was very ill for a spell at the end of that, and came out of the end of that wanting to be a discrimination barrister. But I decided that the way to do that was to hide my real self away. But I got into my early 40s, and that wasn't going to work for me. I could tell that I wouldn't do another 10 years, and probably by the end of the next 10 years, I'd have jumped off a cliff somewhere. Although my first degree was chemistry, so I'm sure I could have popped along to the local hardware shop and made up something nasty to drink with a glass of cider. And I was sat in the barber's chair one day. It's funny, and that was my moment, having a discussion with the barber about whether I was going to have a number 1 cut or a number 2 cut. The chaps watching this will know, but that's basically, it's a buzz cut, and it's where do you set the sheep shears for the thickness of the cut. He must have wondered where I disappeared to shortly thereafter, but we'll come back to that. And I sat there realizing that I was starting to thin a bit on top, and if I didn't get on and transition, I was going to be a rug wearer into the future. Now, I have had some hair transplants to deal with that, but that was the final straw that broke the camel's back. And I had one of those odd weekends that sometimes you have when you've got a big life choice to make, and you go and walk the hills or stroll along a beach or do whatever you need to do. And I came out of the end of the weekend, and on the Monday morning, I emailed my head of chambers. And I said, there's something I need to come and talk to you about. And I'd rather do it in person. And by the way, I'm not going to be leaving chambers, which is generally the reason that barristers email their head of chambers to say that they're off to some entertaining opportunity somewhere else. The grass isn't always greener, by the way. People usually find that out eventually. I see there's some nodding from the knowledgeable people. Anyway, this is, as you're going to hear, a fairly positive story about being looked after by my chambers. So I practice from Old Square, and it would require, I think, chambers to dissolve into nothingness for me not to stay a member of Old Square, given what I'm about to tell you. So I went to see my head of chambers, who'd been puzzling over what was this thing I had to come and talk to her about. And I explained that I had reached the ripe old age of, what was I, 42, 43, and I had no choice but to get on with transition. Oh gosh, she said, I've been trying to work out what it was that you were coming to talk to me about. And I decided that you were coming to tell me that you were terminally ill. It's got to be better than being terminally ill, hasn't it? Said Jane McNeil. And we then both had a glass of wine and rolled about laughing. She also actually said that Jane McNeil, who's now semi-retired, she sits as a judge in the Watford Tribunal, but she'd done employment law since it had been invented in the 1970s. And she'd just come back from a case in one of the regional tribunals where an arrogant judge had been patronizing her for most of a week. And she leant across the table and said, you know, if you transition, you're going to have to get used to being patronized, giving up your male privilege and all that. And I shocked her a bit by leaning across the table and saying, and I had a couple of glasses of wine at this point, I'd quite like to be patronized, because that would sort of show a degree of acceptance in my gender. And it's happened. It has happened. I love people who underestimate me. They usually end up ruining the day, but there you go. Anyway, so we then worked through who did we have to tell and how did we have to tell them, and what were the implications for chambers. And I really enjoyed the process. It was quite fun. Well, sitting on a razor blade in Thailand wasn't that much fun. And especially the flight back from Thailand wasn't that much fun either. And the 12 hours of facial surgery that I had in Belgium weren't a lot of fun. But I have to say that the human condition is essentially ridiculous. And so there are a couple of stories from transition. In fact, I ended up telling chambers, of course, with a note that went around chambers, and Silver medal goes to the male member of Chambers who emailed me to say that they'd been down to Clinton Cards and they'd looked through the work colleague congratulatory section and couldn't quite find anything that was on point. They had a copy of Chambers' Christmas card from the previous year and thought they could do something entertaining with Photoshop if we could give them a couple of days. But otherwise, could they just express some supportive sentiments, which was nice. Gold medal, of course, went to the female member of Chambers who emailed me to welcome me to the sisterhood, but to say that there were a couple of things I needed to know. The first being that all men are bastards, especially those who don't initially appear to be. But that it didn't matter because she was prepared to teach me some female manipulation techniques for a small fee, which would, of course, be drawn in red falling over liquid. And so it proved. So that was quite good. And, do you know, it didn't matter a damn. Transition is like jumping off, riding over the top of the biggest roller coaster you've ever come across. And I'll talk about the first morning when I came into Chambers as me. And it's such a great thing to do because people used to say that they liked working with me, but there was always a core of something, as far as I was concerned, that you couldn't quite get at. There was something private and hidden away. And when you work, as I do in discrimination law, and you need your emotional self sometimes, then having it hidden away is a really bad thing. And being you and being the authentic you is really useful. And I have clients who now say that I'm really fun to work with, especially as my whole self is there. Now, the transition is, of course, a difficult time, and you walk up to that roller coaster edge at different rates. And I certainly spent a certain amount of time as one thing at weekends and something else during the week, which is obviously a bit confusing for both yourself and people who know you. And there came the awful moment one Monday morning when I travelled up to Birmingham for a case that day, and with a heavy heart pulled my Gives and Hawkes suit out of my wheel-along case to change into for the court case that morning, and realised that I'd got to Birmingham without any male shoes. Now, this is, I think we had James talking about problem solving earlier. How do you're in central Birmingham. It is now 8 a.m. You're due in court you just see the clients at 9:30 for a court hearing, and you've got no shoes that you can be seen wearing. What are you going to do? Oh, and like me, you've got slightly big feet. Well, what you do is you end up outside Primark in central Birmingham in your socks on the pavement, waiting for Primark to open just after 9 o'clock. You buy the cheapest, slightly respectable looking pair of pearl shoes, you wear them home, and then you throw them away. And it's just tremendous, the help and support that I had from the rest of the bar, from the judges, and I still get, because you still get an idiot who misgenders you or says something unfortunate, does something unfortunate. And the icy stare that gets from a judge is really useful. And there are times when I sit there and will someone to misgender me, because I know that the judge will intervene and cut their knackers off. Oh, sorry, that's a non-legal expression. But it's really useful with particularly annoying opponents. Transition did require some careful management. I act regularly for a number of police services in terms of their employment work, and that can be quite a stressful environment. And there was a particular claimant against a particular police service who was 9 parts mad. And we were running a really difficult, it was a long-running discrimination case. And the person concerned really hated the people that he'd used to work with, as sometimes happens in discrimination cases. And it was just, the courtroom was alive with electric tension between the two sides all the way through the case. And I'd had the temerity to transition in the middle of it. So we'd done a hearing in April, and I was coming back in October looking rather differently. And of course, you're there to be your client's mouthpiece. And so the last thing you should be doing as a barrister is distracting people from what's happening. So I wrote to the claimant I wrote him a personal letter, which I had sent across by my solicitors, to explain that someone rather different was going to be coming back to do the case in the autumn. And I got the nicest letter back from the individual concerned. My solicitors were really concerned about what might happen, but I got the nicest letter back that you could imagine. It didn't help either side fight the case differently, but at least me being me wasn't an issue. Do I have regrets about transition? Yeah, I didn't do it earlier. I lived 40 plus years of my life not as me. And the bar is somewhere that you can live as you, because frankly, nobody gives a stuff as to whether you're blue, pink, black, gay, straight, trans, or whatever. What the clients want is to win. And certainly in my chambers, it doesn't matter what you are. What matters is what you can do and how you can run the case. And the clerks don't give a stuff either. They just want barristers who want to earn. And the clerks don't mind whether it's that you want another Ferrari to fill up that space in the garage, or you've got your clerk's fees, or you've got your children's school fees to pay. Or in my case, I had another round of hair transplants that I wanted to complete the piece, which means that when they ring you up, they say yes. Mind you, chambers were quite concerned about how they would react when I wandered in, firstly doing my best impression of a female barrister. And what had been arranged was that I would be away up country the week before, and the clerks would be told on the Thursday, and they would have the weekend to get over it, and that I would appear in freshly unwrapped on the Monday morning, as I did. And I have one regret in my transition, and this is it, because I turned up on the Monday morning in a selection of black clothing, as female barristers are taught to wear, so that they appear to be some sort of female version of a 17th century gentleman dressed only from head to toe in black. I don't do it so much these days, but I certainly did it then. But my regret, because the senior clerk had told the clerks not to react. However I turned up, they were not to react. And so when I walked in, there were clerks not staring at blank computer screens, not reacting so hard that it was funny. And the regret is that I didn't turn up dressed as Carmen Miranda with a floral dress and a bowl of fruit on my head, just to see how far you could push the clerks and see how far they could not react. So if you're considering a career at the bar and you're LGBT, it doesn't matter. Come along. There's lots of us here at the bar. Trans is a bit rare because there's only about 1 in 1,000 of us in the population. And there are only 2 out trans barristers at the independent bar. And there is now 1 non-binary barrister at the independent bar. So, and there are plenty of support organisations, an organisation called Free Bar and a couple of other organisations that you can join. And there are plenty now of great role models of people of difference at the bar in our part of difference. So frankly, come on in, the water's lovely.
Thank you so much, Robin, that was absolutely brilliant. That was inspiring and funny, and oh, you're my hero.
Heroine, dear.
Of course. using it as a gender neutral term, and I shouldn't.
Indeed, absolutely so.
Right, I'm going to ask all of our speakers to rejoin us, as it were. They've been sat there patiently listening, and we're going to get to your questions. So do feel free to pop those in the Q&A, and we will get things going. So one of the earliest questions we had was how our students can build resilience when they experience rejection after rejection. I'm assuming in their search for pupillage. So I don't know how many of you got it first time. It's fairly rare. Does anyone have any particular advice? James?
So I guess a few things. One is the reality is to expect it. to expect quite a bit of rejection. I got loads. I mentor quite a few students and they're all getting loads. So it's part and parcel of it, so expect it. I guess the second thing is to try and figure out why, ask for feedback, take it as a kind of, I know this is a bit of an easier thing to say than to do, but if we can take the pushbacks and the rejections as things to learn from, then that's a great thing, because we can then try and improve things. And the third thing, there's one of the ladies who's in one of our mentoring groups who runs a coffee company. It's called the Little Coffee Company, and it exports coffee from Jamaica and from East Africa. It only exists because she got rejected from pupillage, and she didn't know what to do. So she went back to see some of her family in Jamaica, wandered up the hill to her uncle's coffee plantation, and now she's been listed in Forbes as one of the top 10 businesswomen for sustainable business in the world. So sometimes it's not really a rejection, it's kind of a redirection on wherever you were going, and think of it that way. The world's big and life is long, hopefully for most of us, and the profession doesn't really care very much at what age you get there, provided you've got relevant skills and something to bring.
Absolutely. I mean, I know plenty of very successful barristers who didn't get it until their last gasp, the sort of 5th year after they're completing their bar course, and it just took them that bit longer. It's and in terms of the sort of things you can do, I mean, there's loads of legal related work experience. More and more barristers are employing assistants now, so as well as having their clerks, so that's definitely an option, and obviously all the other usual kind of legal work experience. And sometimes you have to just keep plugging away and say if it's the thing for you. Oh, sorry, I've lost my questions. We've had a question so that says, mental health is such a huge issue and it's more acceptable to admit that we're struggling nowadays. Are there any particular organisations at the bar that we can reach out to if we're struggling?
I certainly flag law care, which isn't the bar specific, but legal career specific. We've had some speakers from law care, Elizabeth Rimmer and the like, and there are brilliant books that are listed on the website that provide various support. There are different professionals there who are trained in specific areas of difficulty that you might be facing to reflect and discuss with. So that would be somewhere that I would certainly signpost someone to if they needed support in that regard.
Law care is also available to law students as well as all legal professionals and those who work in law firms and so on as well. There are also, the Inns have a pre-pupillage wellbeing scheme. There's information on our website, which is it's a little bit like an employee assistance program, if you're familiar with those. So you can call up and get advice and access counselling. That's particularly for those who have finished the bar course and haven't yet got pupillage, mainly because obviously your provider should give you access to similar sort of schemes, and once you're in pupillage, the Bar Council has the same sort of scheme available for all those who are pupillage and beyond. Marissa, it's one for you here. So how did you balance wanting to speak out about your disability and the boundaries of being very junior or a pupil? I'm assuming it was slightly less of an option for you.
Well, I mean, that is a great question because, you know, as I said, as a pupil, you are so vulnerable. And I mean, also, you know, to a lesser degree, as a very junior barrister. But the reality is that if you do have a need for support, you are going to have to speak to someone in order to get it. So, for example, I mean, obviously, your pupil supervisor will be your sort of first port of call. And they generally, I mean, they will be able to help you sort of navigate the more sort of political issues that can arise in chambers, and can also maybe give advice on the best way to approach certain things. So, for example, I can remember wanting I mean, you know, we've all sort of heard of the, you know, sort of rogue judges from time to time who can sort of really create issues. And so one thing that I wanted to do in terms of the immigration tribunal was to sort of make them aware that I was going to be attending with a stenographer, because of course one of the sort of vital rules in court procedure is that proceedings must not be recorded by someone who is not the court. And so I didn't want any judges to sort of think, you know, by turning up with a stenographer automatically that I would be recording the proceedings. And so I just wanted there to be some sort of general awareness before I did turn up, some sort of communication to be sent out, so that judges might be aware in advance, as well as my obviously talking to the clerk before any court hearing. And so, you know, I spoke to my pupil supervisor, and they liaised with the president of the tribunal. We even had a meeting about it. And it was all very friendly, and, you know, everyone was very willing to sort of assist. And so it's just sort of thinking about different ways of navigating, you know, who to talk to, what to say, and just the different channels. I mean, I mentioned the inns of court before, and of course, you know, if you do feel like you're sort of stuck and you don't want to approach someone within chambers itself, then you can also approach someone at the end of court, just as a more sort of independent or impartial person to sort of flesh out how best to approach them.
I wholeheartedly agree, obviously, with that. But in all seriousness, the inns, obviously, one of the big benefits for the inns is that we obviously have such a wide reach and wide range of members that we can always find you somebody to talk to who it's not going to get packed to your chambers, or, you know, it's it's definitely always worth a call to us. We've had a few questions about any advice on overcoming imposter syndrome. I can wholeheartedly say I have it too. It's not unique to the bar. I think everybody has it, but I still don't really feel like a grown-up. I feel like I'm about 18 still, and really shouldn't be sat here talking to all of you. But do any of our speakers, you know, have any advice for possibly not overcoming it, but maybe coping with it? No, just living with it. James, yeah.
Sorry, Emma, were you going to? Because I've already...
Go for it.
Well, here's something, it might sound a little bit deep. Underneath all the layers in imposter syndrome, there's a question which is, what do I feel I lack, or what do I feel I wasn't given? And if anyone wants to really explore this, that's the kind of territory to be in. On the surface, here's something you can do. Treat the job being about your role, not as you as a person. It's about your role as a barrister. And then ask yourself, what are the attributes and attitudes that I need in my role as a barrister? Because they're different maybe to what you can call upon when I think of myself as James Pereira. I'm a slightly different person to James Pereira, the barrister. And you kind of give yourself permission then to call upon things that you might not have readily available to you normally. So embody and embrace your role. Before I start speaking, I just want to say something that Robin said, which I think is absolutely one, and it's such an important thing. Robin, thank you. It's the bar is somewhere you can live as you. And there is so much stuff said at the moment about diversity and all sorts of things, which puts people it's not necessarily helpful for people who are seeking entry to the bar. And I think all the speakers here this evening have made it clear that you can be different, or you can have your struggles, and you've still got a place of belonging and a place where you can be welcome. I think that's so important for people to hear. Thank you.
I completely agree.
I have a way of overcoming imposter syndrome.
Oh, excellent.
You win. No, that's a bit facetious, but we will all have difficult days. We will all have the day when you knew the result should have been other than what you come out of court with. When you've done 25 years at the bar, if you haven't got stored away those few cases where you really made a difference, then you're in the wrong profession. And I have a few cases that are like that. where I know that I changed someone's life by what I did. An early one was a profoundly, a chap who was losing his sight and was an industrial worker who was losing his sight and was horribly treated by his employers. And in the end, we proved that he'd suffered lifetime loss. So we ended up with an award for somebody. This was somebody who earned between 10 and 20,000 pounds a year, and we ended up with an award of the thick end of £500,000, which set him and his family up for life in the future. And I still, 15 years later, I still get a Christmas card every year from them. And that's a great story, and we haven't got time for me to tell it tonight because barristers telling stories about their favourite cases is really, really dangerous. But another time, if any of the students want to hear the story, ask me about the air conditioning case. It's about that will remind me what it's about. And whenever I have a dark time, and this year I've done a case called Taylor and Jaguar Land Rover that's changed the law on discrimination against people undergoing gender reassignment. And that now joins that little group of precious things that you have put away that you can polish on a dark day and say, I achieved that. And you will do that. And it doesn't have to be cases that change the law. Those of us who practice in family law or whatever, when the right parent has got the child or the right arrangements have been come to for the child, for example, that's as much of an achievement as a big award or a case that changes the law. And in any area that you practice, if you're any good and you're here for any length of time, you'll have those bright pebbles to polish in your special box where you keep them locked away for those dark moments when you need them.
It's an excellent piece of advice. I'm gonna keep that one. And it's a bit like James with his list of the things he should have said in court. I love it. We've had a few questions about, how, James, you spoke a bit about the kind of the pressures to burn the midnight oil, to take, and Emma as well, the sort of taking every case going, traveling up and down the country. How easy is it to say no to that in the early years, and what can you do if you do feel that pressure to work that hard?
Let me say a little bit about that. So some of the questions are about people who are in pupillage and some early years. So the first thing I'd say is focus on quality. You will establish your reputation by doing good quality work, and you obviously quantity is the enemy of quality after a point in time. So focus on quality. You'll take silk because of the quality of your work, because you're the excellence, not because of the amount that you do. The second thing is there's the goose that lays the golden egg analogy, isn't there? There's the goose keeps laying the golden eggs, the farmer keeps picking them up. Eventually he gets impatient, so he goes and cuts the goose open, gets the eggs out, and then realizes he doesn't have a goose to lay the eggs anymore. We're the goose, and our work is the golden egg, and if you don't look after yourself, no more golden eggs. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, particularly for pupils, be clever about relationships. So people will remember work that's done badly. They won't remember so much if you said, I'm not available to do work. And if you say, I'm not available to do work because I'm already doing work for Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so in Chambers, they will respect that because they will know that you're somebody who values the commitments that you've made. And that's really what it's about. You serve people better by sticking up your boundaries and doing excellent work within your capacity. Finally, I said we'd written lots of articles. There's one we've written on Loving Legal Life called The Power of No. And it's all about the benefits of saying no. So if you Google Loving Legal Life, The Power of No, you'll see a little kind of crib sheet about why it's good to turn things away.
Can I just add to what James has said in terms of being a pupil or a very junior practitioner, or indeed coming back from a career break? There is a power dynamic. And particularly when you're junior, there's that power dynamic with the clerks, and they will ask you to travel distant miles and stack your diary up high, and you will feel the pressure to say yes. And actually, as James has identified, you will be respected and recognised by the clerks when you say no and give valid and good reasons for saying no to ensure the quality for your pupil supervisors and indeed the clients ultimately. It does take a leap of faith and a huge leap of confidence to do so, but ultimately, if you have good reasons and good grounds to say no, you will be respected and endorsed for that.
Robin or Marissa, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
I think it's all been covered, really.
Great. Okay.
Drink lots of coffee.
Yeah, I definitely do that one. I'm not sure how good it is for my physical my physical well-being, but
No, don't drink.
The heart races occasionally. We did have a question about whether how easy it is to admit to having mental health issues, and how that can sort of not have an adverse impact. Does anyone have any particular sort of advice? I know that the bar has done a lot about the importance of well-being, and is much more open than it used to be to discussing those sorts of challenges.
I've a couple of times, and I won't say where because I practiced. I didn't get tenancy where I did pupillage, and then I've been with 2 chambers in between, and now I've been at Old Square 14 years now. So please don't draw any conclusions about where this was, but I have twice, and I think it's the professional thing. I've twice picked up pieces of work that were about to fall into a disaster by a member of chambers who was in difficulty. Now, I'm a trained counsellor, and I had a career before I came to the bar. I worked in the transport industry, and we were very keen on reducing stress, and I had some training about that. And there are things that you can spot when people are going wrong, and a couple of times I've spotted things where people are going wrong. And if you're in a decent set of chambers, because they don't want people to fail, they don't want people to get into difficulties, and there are warning signs that can be picked up, and equally there are people to reach out to. And in both those cases, I took on, in fact, it combines the last question with the previous one. On one occasion, I did about 70 hours over about 4 days to be ready for a case that a member of my then chambers had run into real difficulties with. They'd taken on a case that was beyond them, really, and it was going to turn into a complete disaster. And a savvy clerk turned around to me and said, "Can you help?" We did. Me and another member rescued the case, and the case was fought and won appropriately, with a switch of barrister at the last moment. And we are out here in the profession. There are helpful people out here in the profession around you. And if you need to come to someone, there are awful chambers to be in, but if you're somewhere decent, then there are people around you who will reach out to you and wrap their arms around you when you need us. And we will, partly because we're human beings and it's the right thing to do, because we know that there are times when we might need that. And that's part of being a profession as opposed to just a job. And there are fewer years ahead for me than there are behind now, because I'm in my later 50s, and I have been tremendously helped along the way, and particularly younger people at the bar. If I can, hey, here I am in this session this evening, so if I can offer a bit of help to people who are coming behind when I'm being pushed around in my bath chair, then I'll be pleased that you're there. And we are here to reach out to, and in a way that's not, and we would do it professionally. So, you won't have tales told about the difficulty that you had when you reach out to somebody, assuming that you're in the right place with the right people, as most chambers are. You will be helped and supported, So I can't speak for the world in general, but I can speak for decent chambers at the bar, and we're getting better and better at looking after each other.
It's that analogy again that James used earlier of us all looking at like graceful swans, like we have just woken up this morning and drunk our coffee and just had a lovely chilled evening of drinking wine and chatting with friends, and we've been working absolutely every hour God sent to make sure we've got it damn right. We all present as though we are absolutely fine and can take on anything that's thrown at us, but we're all human. Everyone is human, and that's okay. And you will have colleagues and friends at the bar. You will create those, and they will vary over time through your progress at the end career, and keep them close, because you will need them and they will need you, and that's also okay.
It's tremendously hard work to look effortless, isn't it?
Absolutely.
One thing we sort of, I get asked a fair bit, is about whether to disclose disabilities, particularly mental health, on a pupillage application or during pupillage, or even, you know, as a junior barrister. And I think, you know, the main point really is that if you don't disclose it, then it's not something that anyone can really provide support for, because, you know, you're not sort of saying, look, this is the support that I need. And, you know, Robin has kind of set this out so much better than I ever could. But I really, I feel the same way, in the sense that, you know, the bar and barristers in general really don't care what you look like. You know, they don't care where you come from, you know, how you speak, you know, all of those little things. What people care about fundamentally, your clients, it's about, you know, getting the job done. And I think your fellow barristers and the people who interview you will see that. And so that's really what they care about, kind of getting you to the end product. And so it's really, I think, just having that aim in mind, rather than being, you know, sort of concerned about what people think, because it really just doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, I think anything else that any of us said would be entirely gilding the lily, because I think that's a brilliant point to end on. It was, you know, something that in listening to our speakers this evening, I was just thinking, well, 4 people with completely different experiences, different practices, different challenges at the bar, but it just shows how important it is for your well-being to be your authentic self, and to not give into those preconceptions about what a barrister is or does or looks like. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers so much for joining us and sharing this evening. I don't know if they have seen in the chat just how much love they're all getting, but thank you all very much. And if we were in the hall or in the lecture theatre, you'd get a big round of applause, but you'll just have to make do with mine. Thank you all very, very much. And thank you to all of our students for your questions this evening as well. That is the end of the webinar. So if you do want to shoot off and enjoy your evening or your morning, depending on where you are in the world, you absolutely can do so. As I said at the start, I will be staying on for a little bit to answer any more questions general questions you might have about the in or qualifying sessions. But thank you all very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evening, morning, whatever it might be. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Take care.